Hello and welcome. Today we have two guests with us, Dr. Jennifer Roberts, who's the director of the Resilient Systems Office here at ARPA-H, and also Dr. Amy Jenkins. Dr. Amy Jenkins just recently came on board as the director of the Health Science Futures Office. Jennifer, Amy, thank you both for being with us today. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like for, I guess, a new applicant to the agency to come up with an idea that's sufficiently ARPA-H ready, or as some of the other ARPAs say, ARPA hard?
An important part of applying to an ARPA organization is to have a really strong candidate plus a great program idea. And what makes a good program idea is identifying these areas where a large influx of investment in a short time frame can fundamentally change our perception of what's possible. So in order to really define that program concept, the program manager has to have a clear idea of a solution space where some type of revolutionary innovation is possible. They need to have an idea of how to go about making that change. And they also need to clearly articulate why that fundamental shift is not going to happen in its own, either through normal government funding mechanisms or normal private sector investments. So they need to understand the limitations of the state of the art, what's missing, where those gaps are, and also how innovation can fundamentally address those gaps.
So, Amy, what's a day in the life of the program manager like?
The biggest thing that program managers do on a day-to-day basis is they are interacting with and talking to and evaluating the efforts that all of the groups that they are funding undergo, and ensuring that those groups are still working towards their end goals. One thing that I've said very often is that at ARPA-H and at other ARPAs, we are not doing science for science sake. Doing science for science sake is a very important role that organizations like the NIH and the NSF play. And they are critical parts of this ecosystem. But that's not what we're doing at ARPA-H. We are delivering capabilities. And so the day-to-day role of a program manager is to ensure that those groups are staying on that targeted path. If things are not working, it's having a conversation about, okay, what's a different approach? What's another route that we can take to get to this end goal? And if that requires us taking that different route and making modifications to the statement of work or to the objectives, then that's what we'll do. And so the day-to-day interactions, there's a lot of interactions with the performer groups and with the groups that we're funding. And then there's also a lot of interaction, I would say, maybe a smaller percentage of the day-to-day job is messaging what we're trying to do to the public. We want the American public to understand what we're doing. We want them to see how this could potentially impact health outcomes for everyone in this country in the future. And so it's important for a program manager to have those communication skills. Even people that are still very technical, sometimes you're going to be explaining biochemistry to an aeronautical engineer. It's very important to be able to explain those concepts and so that people understand how we're going to hopefully change their lives.
So Jen, what should applicants expect out of the application process?
When we're looking for candidates, we're again looking for this person plus this idea. So an important part of the application process is what we call the Hallmeyer document, or the Hallmeyer questions, which is really just a set of questions that's intended to very succinctly summarize what's the core problem area, what new innovation are you providing in order to try and solve that problem, and how does that relate to the limitations in the current state of the art?
Is there something that makes, one set of Hallmeyer responses necessarily better than another, or make them stand out in terms of their ideas?
Yeah, there's a couple things. So one has to do with the ability to really explain the significance of the problem. So if folks come in and they say, something like, hey, diabetes, it's a big problem and we're going to solve it, that's going to be less compelling than saying this particular aspect of diabetes that we have a solution for is a $2 billion problem per year and it affects X number of people, right? That provides a lot more scope into the magnitude of what the particular technical solution is likely to affect. And then that level of detail is also needed when we're talking about the innovation. Saying, I'm going to apply AI to data in order to find precursors for cancer, that's arguably a very vague explanation versus saying, What's really needed here is some type of maybe deep learning approach that looks at a particular type of biomarkers in a new way in order to enable whatever new early prevention. And of course, I'm making all of this up, so it would need to be a better technical argument than that. But in terms of the level of detail, it needs to get to that point where you have some understanding of the specific tools that will be brought to bear in order to really make this type of technological breakthrough feasible.
What are some of the ways that you're seeing people have difficulty answering the How Mera questions, and what do you recommend to them?
So one area has to do with scope. So some of the applications that we're seeing really are focused on like what a single lab might do. So, I'm going to have a professor and several grad students. That's not the model for an ARPA-H program. Other folks are saying like, well, if we got these 3 teams together, we could build this like nice software solution. And it's very linear. That's not really what we're looking for an ARPA-H program. So in terms of scope, we're definitely looking for something bigger, something where you hear about the idea and you're like, well, maybe that could work. If it could work, it would be really awesome, but I'm not sure. So then how can we think about setting up teams in order to try out 3 to 5 different approaches? Depends on the nature of the area. How many different approaches would we want to try? How many different types of disciplines do you need to pull together in order to see if something could be feasible? So thinking on those types of terms and really saying like, hey, here's a really big challenge for the field. What are different ways that that we could get there? And really you're looking for something where there's going to be several different creative approaches that might get us to the goal. And we really don't know which one would work, but we want to find out.
The other thing that you will hear people talk about very frequently at an ARPA and an ARPA-H is that we are not funding incremental science. And so what that means is that we are not funding a 2x or a 3x improvement over the current state of the art. We are funding a 1,000x improvement over the state of the art. We are funding many times the improvement, and things that may make people in the scientific realm giggle a little bit and say, that's too hard, it's impossible, it's not possible. That's probably the exact right place that we should be at an ARPA-H, because oftentimes the reason those things are not possible right now is because they're a bit stovepiped into disciplines. But perhaps if you bring in biochemists and electrical engineers and mechanical engineers and some microbiologists, maybe when you put all those people in a room, now maybe these things actually do become possible. And that's what we're very good at doing at ARPA-H.
So typically you want to see a kernel of evidence before you decide to make a major investment.
Yep.
That's right. I think of it as we are funding science, not science fiction. Everything that we do is rooted in science and should be rooted in publications and in existing data that makes us believe that it is possible.
Amy, what kind of program managers come to the agency? Are they necessarily all sharing the same characteristics?
Actually, I think there are a couple different types of people that come to these types of agencies. I generally tend to book them into 2 different categories. The first category is the person that's just a big ideas person. Their whole career, maybe from the time they were a graduate student through postdoc work and then into their career, they've just had a wealth and a spring of ideas always coming forward, and they've always wanted to apply those ideas maybe to disciplines or other areas of research that people just hadn't considered before. And you can take a new technology that people are not thinking about for one application and apply it into a new realm, and it completely changes the paradigm. So I think of those people as big ideas people. On the other end of the spectrum, I think are people that have been in the industry for a while, whether it's academic or private sector or even government, and they know what the gaps are, and they're frustrated by those gaps. They see those gaps, they know them intimately, and they know they can likely be solved with some new emerging technologies, but they're not being solved. And so they're gap fillers. We tend to think of them as tech push versus tech pull program managers. And I think that there is a fairly even, maybe a more of a divide on towards the people that are able to identify those gaps. But I think that program managers can be equally successful coming out of those 2 different buckets.
Amy, you've moved from a program manager position to now a position of leadership, and effectively are extending your service to the federal government. Can you talk to me a little bit about what service means to you?
I think that, and I've seen this for several program managers, that the impact that we are able to have in an ARPA is amazing when it can come to fruition. And that I saw that during the COVID-19 pandemic and wanted to continue that service. And so the federal government and the groups that we fund can oftentimes develop technologies, and it doesn't always happen at an ARPA. Oftentimes, ARPA technologies don't come to fruition and people don't see the fruits of their labor, if you will, until a decade or more into the future. And sometimes you see the fruits of your labor happening in real time when there's a crisis. And so the COVID-19 crisis was a great example of that, where the innovative technologies that we were developing at DARPA were able to be deployed as part of the pandemic. And seeing the impact that that had on patients and hearing the impact that that had on patients was really quite rewarding. And I think you can get that opportunity in the private sector as well. But government service, it really is an opportunity to see this from a very broad lens and to be able to see this from a high level view. And we often within the government are the go-to place when there's an emergency to really have an impact on lives. And so that was very important to me and was what really led me to say I want to stay in the government and I want to keep funding and keep working towards innovative science and innovative technology solutions and just broadening the aperture a little bit out of the defense realm and into the health realm. And I think that's it's a noble and exciting opportunity for people to be able to have that daily impact.
Same question to you, Jen. What makes you want to continue to serve?
The scale at which an ARPA-H program manager can operate is just unlike what can happen in most other places. There's nothing like a ARPA-style organization to be able to just pull in and really try something new with experts from across many fields. And I think just being able to have access to that type of resource or that set of resources in order to try and fundamentally change what's possible, it's a very exciting and rewarding place to be. I see it as being a place where you can really change people's perception of what's possible, and hopefully with ARPA-H, really help affect people's lives in a meaningful and positive way.
Jen, Amy, thank you both for your time today. I really appreciate it.